So I'm going to give you guys a couple little mini lectures about some theory that goes along with some of the stuff we've been talking about inside class, right? So one of the things that we talked about in the last class was we talked about Habermas, and we talked about Lyotard and this idea of postmodernism. And there's a lot of people around the same time who are talking about modernism and postmodernism, right? And Hopkins, as you remember, sort of identifies a difference in thinking that occurs around um, the time of like 1950s, late 1950s, like looking at movements like pop art. So things that are rising out of Duchamp's trajectory, right? He sort of identifies this as postmodern. And we think about what postmodern means. It means sort of what comes after modernism or what comes as a reaction to modernism, right? So it's not modernism, but it's in conversation with modernism. And some of the things that we need to understand about modernism itself is first that modernism is interested in a binary, right? Which means that it's interested in opposing things like the West versus the East and black versus white and men versus women, right? So it's interested in setting up things in opposition to each other in order to define them, right? So the way that we know what is Western art is by setting up sort of these definitions about what is not part of or included inside Western art, right? Which is one of the reasons why there is this story about art that supposedly arises out of this trajectory from Greek and Roman art. And this is one of the reasons why we also look at and point to the Renaissance as being the start of the modern era. And that's not modern art as in what Greenberg thinks modern art is, which is the trajectory from like Cezanne through minimalism, right? So minimalism is sort of the last of the great modernist painting, modernist art movements, right? And it's sort of the end. There's not really a whole lot more that can be done to take that trajectory very far, right? So the stuff that we're going to be talking about for the rest of the season is stuff that sort of rejects modernism and builds its own story using smaller ideas. So rather than saying artists are epic heroes that create these great narratives through beautiful paintings, we can think more of artists being um, individuals with small stories who are in conversation with other small stories, right? And this is called intertextuality, right? And we talked about this. We talked about pastiche and versus parody and the idea of like the original, which is a modernist idea, the idea of artist as original. And then we talked about the artist as so the artist is individual, or the artist is original, is modern, the modern artist, and then a copy being sort of like something that's referring back, and that's right this stage in which artists started thinking more about production, and that's like stuff like minimalism, but they're still thinking back on this idea of original and then production, and then eventually you get to this idea of the simulacra in which it's posited that there is never a need for a return, right? There's no original in the background. So what we're going to talk about today is Martin Heidegger, because it's really, I think, a very good illustration about the difference between modernist thinking and postmodern thinking, right? So you have Martin Heidegger. He lived, he was born in 1869. He died in 1976, and he lived in Germany. He's a German philosopher or critical theorist. And his important works in relation to, I mean, he's got a lot of important works, but in relation to what we're concerned with in this class, the important works that he has are The Origin of a Work of Art and the question concerning technology. Oh, and that's spelled wrong. Look at that. Okay, so important ideas that he has contained within The Origin of the Work of Art. So he he starts talking about art and saying that art is a hermeneutic circle, right? And so, what comes first? Is it art because it's created by an artist, or does the fact that art is created make the person the artist? And so he talks about this, right? And he says, um, he's talking about the work that art does. So what he's trying to do is differentiate between art and making, right? So he says art does something beyond making. So he said that art lets truth originate. It reflects new ways of thinking about the human condition. He says that art is the earth, which is the thinginess of the object, set to work by the artist to forge worlds into truth, right? And so basically what that means is that for him, the work of the artist is um, to use the earth, so like the paint, the clay, whatever, the stone, whatever the media is, um, and to locate within that um, a basic truth, right? An idea about the world, and use work, so the work of his hands and his mind, to um, let the truth of that medium be set to work to forge worlds into ideas that are big truths, right? So he favors being. He is phenomenological. He favors being over tradition. So he's not interested in trying to maintain a certain style. He's more interested in seeing um, seeing worlds set up and finding truth inside art, right? So you can have a cup which somebody makes, which is an object that's designed and executed. And then you can have a cup that tells you about the nature of cups, right? So he's not as interested in aesthetics and what makes something beautiful as he is in underlining what he believes art's purpose should be. So it's both a response to Kant and a critique of it. So he's saying that Kant sort of gets it wrong, right? Okay. So the way that this works, we're going to use this example, and this is the example, one of the examples that he uses inside his Origin of a Work of Art. He talks about Van Gogh's shoes. And he says that what Van Gogh does is to set to work the earth, the paint, right? Through his painting, he doesn't just depict or represent a pair of shoes, but he gives us a glimpse into the identity of the person who's wearing the shoes, right? And he says you see sort of through his labor the soul and the truth about these shoes rise to the surface. And he identifies the person who wears the shoes as this peasant, right? He says it's a member of the Volk, right? Now, here's where the problem is. And one of the reasons we're talking about this is in relation also as well to Anselm Kiefer, and one of the reasons why people have such problems with that work resurging during the 1980s is that the German Volk, I mean, this is an idea that is talked about in relation to Nazism, right? The rising up of the German Volk and the idea that the German people were better than all the rest of the people, right? So there's problematic philosophical associations, and Heidegger really skirts a line um, in terms of his allegiance with Nazism, right? So on the one hand, he was not persecuted as a criminal or as a war criminal. He was in Germany during World War II and before. And he was teaching, and a lot of his philosophy is based on the idea that there are superior ways of being, right? So he looks back at the Greeks and says the Greeks were a superior in their thought process. The Romans sort of bastardize Greek philosophy, and then it gets reclaimed inside the Italian Renaissance, and it's all just a jumbled mess. And if we go back to the pure ideas, the ideas are better. And the problem is that Heidegger is, while there are problematic and sort of racist ideas inside his work, he's also super, super, super smart, right? So contending with him and outthinking him in a lot of ways is next to impossible. Like, there's a lot of people who have sort of tried to take him on, and we're going to talk about a few of those today. So in the first place, let's talk a little bit about some of his critics and followers. So you have Myra Shapiro, and Myra Shapiro, through his letters, has an emotional critique for Heidegger that makes some good points, but also makes some assumptions about meaning, which we'll talk about when we talk about Jacques Derrida, who Jacques Derrida points out these inside his work. And it helps to think about the fact that Shapiro it helps to contextualize Shapiro and Heidegger when you understand that Shapiro is Jewish and Heidegger was most likely a Nazi. So Shapiro offers a reading of The Origin of Work of Art and says that that Heidegger's notion of Van Gogh's shoes as peasant shoes is wrong. He takes issue with, quote unquote, the authenticity of the rural landscape, the pathos rooted in the call of the earth and the labor of the field, and the fact that the entire folk world, which Heidegger seems to present as the truth of the painting, this is all something that is, he says, is incorrect. And he says that these are Van Gogh shoes, not a peasant's shoes, and that therefore they would be the shoes of a migrant and a city dweller, right? So that's what he's saying is happening inside these works. Derrida responds and says Shapiro and Heidegger are saying they're making the same point, which is to ground the shoes to this process of representation. So they're saying the shoes are standing in as a symbol for this person who doesn't appear inside the painting. So Derrida says that the truth of the shoes aren't located on either the peasant woman or the artist. He says Heidegger could be talking about any painting of shoes. And the shoes in the painting in question don't even, the shoes that he's assuming are the painting in question don't even need to be a pair. So he seeks to unseat the authority of the quote unquote fixed essence of shoes, right? So he says, what you're saying about this painting is not grounded inside the object. There's no peasant woman. There's no Van Gogh. We have a pair of shoes, and the only thing that we know about them is what's depicted. And we're not even sure. I mean, it goes back and Heidegger looks and he can't find the pair of shoes. Like, he doesn't know which painting he's looking at. So just to show you, it could be these, which is what most people say that it is. But it also could be these, and these, or these, or these, or these, or these, right? So this is what Derrida is saying. He's saying, what you're talking about, you're bringing in excess baggage, which is outside the work of the object itself, right? So, and there's no fixed essence of shoes. So you're creating this idea that you want, and you're imposing it upon the work of the painting, right? So it's like, this is not a pipe, right? It's the same sort of idea. The meaning of shoes as an icon doesn't function. Okay, so here's what Jameson says, and Jameson is who we're talking about in relationship to this idea of postmodernism. Jameson says Derrida is wrong. Inside modernist work, inside something like Van Gogh, there was a soul and an intention and a essence of shoes. But now, inside work like Warhol, that's gone. There is no original, there is no soul, there is no seeking. there's a new thing.